explicit, basically. In 1992, before this article, Costanza and Herman Daly, whom we met last time, co-authored a piece in which they broke down the world into this list of forms of capital. And I've got a number of slides here in which we're going to watch Robert Costanza's ideas of forms of capital change over time. Okay? So as of 1992, and this was in conservation biology, I believe, they define these kinds: renewable natural capital, RNC, non-renewable natural capital, which includes things like oil reserves, manufactured capital, and human capital. And they suggest that the total natural capital is the sum of renewable and non-renewable natural capital, and that the key to sustainability is to maintain constancy of the total natural capital. And they say that what this means is that you can use non-renewable natural capital, but its use will not be sustainable unless it's somehow compensated by an increase in renewable natural capital. So the sort of end point is that you're probably better off from a sustainability point of view not using non-renewable natural capital for the simple reason that it's not renewable. And therefore its use is always potentially unsustainable. And the only way you can get around that is to somehow enhance renewable natural capital to make up for it. By 1997, when they do the value of everything article, they've got a slightly different classificatory scheme, categories. Natural capital includes things like trees, minerals, ecosystems, the atmosphere, and so on. Manufactured capital are machines and buildings. Human capital is physical bodies. And then there are intangible forms of capital, such as information in computers and brains. Any thoughts about this? By 2009, last year, Robert Costanza writes another piece. And here he's got it slightly differently defined yet again. And there could be quotation marks here. Many of these are, in fact, specifically lifted from the article. It seemed like it was cluttering things up. So, built capital, factories, offices, and other built infrastructure and their products. Human capital, including health, knowledge, and all the other attributes of individual humans that allow them to function in a complex society. I love that one. I wonder if it includes, like, your wardrobe. Social capital, formal and informal networks among people. And then natural capital, the world's ecosystems, and all the services they provide. And social capital is one that sort of popped up because of its currency among another audience of scholars, academics, sociologists in particular, who have sort of zeroed in on this idea of informal and formal networks among people that somehow contribute to human well-being, and that these should be recognized as capital, even if they are non-marketed and intangible in many ways. Yeah.
I feel like he's kind of shooting himself in the foot doing that.
He's shooting himself in the foot. Why?
Because he keeps on changing the methodology, so he's showing just how much things can be different if you change the methodology.
Okay. How about you? Okay, that's an interesting question. I mean, is it not the case that your networks among people have a lot to do with the attributes of individual humans that allow them to function in a complex society? Yeah, there's certainly a certain amount of fuzziness here. Yeah? They're all interrelated. Certainly they're all interrelated. Has anybody read this piece? Here we go. He's trying to suggest that he's found a new way of thinking about all this, and that we desperately need this new way of thinking about all this, and that it relates to the fact that, as he puts it, in an empty world, he said we used to live in an empty world in which the thing that was scarce was built capital, and perhaps people. And natural capital was abundant. And so it was not surprising that we sort of took it for granted or neglected or didn't worry about it. But that now we live in a full world in which there are lots of people and tons of built capital, and that what's now in relatively short supply is in fact social capital and natural capital. And that therefore we need to reconceptualize this. But I'll come back to that in a moment. Perhaps it's unfair to put his three different schemes up there one by one, because it gives the impression that he's like just completely changing his tune. I don't actually think he's changing his tune that much, but I do think he is implicitly recognizing the limitations of his earlier ways of framing this, and he's trying to improve it, which might be wishy-washiness, but might actually be just a good faith effort to recognize the shortcomings and correct them in some fashion. Anyway, let's move on for a moment. In the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, the framework is very much one in which natural capital is degraded because it is external to market processes. It's precisely that they aren't priced. That means that the costs can't be calculated, and nobody recognizes them when they're making their calculations about how to invest and what is economically valuable. These are externalities. When an action results in the degradation of a service that harms other individuals, no market mechanism exists, nor in many cases could it exist to ensure that the individuals harmed are compensated for the damages they suffer. So if a whole bunch of land gets converted, forest gets cut down and converted to crops, and that affects water cycling and results in water quality problems for people who live 200 miles downstream, that loss in water quality is an externality of the activities upstream, because there's no mechanism by which the people downstream can hold the people who clear the forest responsible and make them pay for the costs associated with dealing with water quality problems downstream. This is a classic way of thinking about this as externalities, and it follows in that framework that the thing to do is to internalize those costs, is to find ways of making the people who cause environmental problems pay the full price, including these non-marketed externalities that affect other people and cost them in well-being and maybe also in their pocketbooks. Many changes in ecosystem management have involved the privatization of what were formerly common pool resources. The assessment also recognizes this, that when a formerly common or non-marketed ecosystem good or service is captured and made private, it has consequences for those resources. And we've already talked a little bit about this. But again, the idea is that the conversion of a previously non-marketed ecosystem or service to a marketed one can, in fact, be deleterious and degrade the system. So we have a system, sort of schematic diagram here. You have free goods, so-called free goods, produced by nature, which are harvested or removed and sold in a market. And if it's done within limits, assuming this is a renewable natural resource, the cycle can repeat, and it might be considered sustainable. If it exceeds those limits, the resource becomes scarce. In a classic sort of Adam Smithian economics world, the fact that it becomes scarce causes prices to increase. And that incentivizes people to develop alternatives or substitutes, right? To come up with another source of that material to increase the supply, or to come up with an alternative that can replace it. If you come up with an alternative, technologies that lower costs, you can then perhaps go back to the beginning of this and have it all work out. This is sort of a framework that is, its hope can be applied to these externalities, right? Can you essentially put a price on these things? So it's not about scarcity, it's about imposing the full costs on the producers and forcing it to work within this framework. Yeah. Well, for a non-renewable resource, you sort of, the limits are differently configured, right? I mean, the cycle can't repeat forever if it's a non-renewable resource. I mean, you can open up new sources such that prices come down, that kind of thing, and prices can increase, incentivized technologies. Yeah. Well, the free good is in quotation marks here because the idea is that you might, for instance, come up with a technology that allows you to tap something that previously wasn't tapped and wasn't priced, right? It's not necessarily. I mean, free is in quotation marks because this is, I mean, in the sort of pristine world of ideal models, there's such a thing as a free good. When you actually start trying to pin this down to empirical examples, it's not necessarily free. Now, I got to go quickly here if I'm going to get anywhere near the end of this. Another way of thinking about this then, right? You've got private commodified goods, which are a subset of a larger whole, and the rest is sort of public or free. And the question, again, is the relationship between the two of them. The growth of the market economy, if you think about it this way from the perspective of, say, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment or Costanza's articles, is about the growth of the private commodified portion of this circle, sort of eating up the public and free part, such that it diminishes over time. And the old model of environmental regulation basically said we're going to use the power of the state to contain that growth, to limit it, or at least to limit its excesses, limit certain forms of it. We're just going to say it's illegal to pollute water beyond this amount, for example. Or it's illegal to clear cut in these places that we have set aside because of their watershed values or because of their aesthetic values or for whatever other reason. It was a regulatory paradigm that was clearly about the state acting as a kind of container or brake on the economy. And this is precisely the model that it still seems hard to, I mean, it's amazing how out of fashion this model is. This model is now considered basically untenable, unworkable, or at least it's not the thing that you're going to be able to get very far promoting as a solution to these things. It would be kind of like saying, well, let's just use the state and international law, and we'll just put a cap on the amount of fossil fuel that can be burned. Have you heard that suggested? It's not an idea that's got much currency these days in policy debates. There's certainly a lot of reasons why that might make sense. But a lot of people would say, well, you'll never make it work anyway. So then you've got to do this other approach. The contradiction that I pointed out several weeks ago, the assessment itself, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment itself, recommends greater use of economic instruments and market-based approaches in the management of ecosystem services. They do not endorse the regulatory paradigm. They instead endorse what we might call the green governance paradigm, in which the solution to these problems is precisely to internalize all of the externalities associated with economic activity and force them all into the accounting, such that the market itself has to internalize and deal with the costs of environmental degradation. And in many ways, the effort to price ecosystem services is precisely motivated by this vision, in which everything, in a sense, becomes, if not private, at least priced, and therefore can function in a kind of combined market regulatory framework as commodities. Yes?
How do you internalize an externality? Like, a lot of one way to internalize externalities is through government intervention. I mean, it's a private party.
Right. Right. This is a very important point. It is totally true. It is frequently left unstated or neglected. You can't possibly put prices on some of these things without having a state or state-like body do it for you, right? All of those methods for coming up with prices, some of them can be marketized fairly straightforwardly, but many of them involve some kind of deliberative body deciding what the price will be, and then creating some kind of surrogate or proxy commodity for it, right? So you decide how much carbon you're willing to see emitted, and you generate permits, and then the price of those permits moves up and down in the market. This is cap and trade. And it's true. People say, well, cap and trade is great because it's the market, but it's a market that can't exist without the state. That's a very good point. So how to value natural capital, and here I think Costanza's evolution is quite interesting. In 92, they say the macro allocation or scale problem should be viewed as a social or collective decision rather than an individualistic market decision. Valuation of natural capital, we submit, should be done by individuals acting in an entirely different mode from that in which they operate in consumer markets. They basically say this is a political decision, has to be a political decision, and should be made politically and not somehow allowed to be determined simply by individual price decisions or purchasing decisions in the marketplace. This is their vision in 92. They sort of recognize that natural capital can't be simply something you leave up to the market to price. One can generally not value capital directly, they write. Discounting behavior may be symptomatic of a kind of semi-rational, sub-optimizing behavior known as a social trap. There is a reasonable case to be made for a zero discount rate in decisions taken on behalf of society at large. Everyone knows what a discount rate is? No. A discount rate is a question, how do you value something way in the future compared to something right now? In other words, if we think the ecosystem services of the world are worth $33 trillion to us, what will they be worth? How do we estimate their value in the future and compare that to the value now? If we had to decide whether to liquidate the $33 trillion right now, how do we measure what that might represent in terms of a loss to a generation from now or 3 generations from now? This is related to, in economics, this is related to how do you value the current dollar versus a dollar 10 years from now. And a discount rate is a rate at which you sort of reduce the value in the future, given that it's 10 years out or 20 years out. A zero discount rate would imply that a dollar 100 years from now, a dollar of economic activity, is worth the same as a dollar now. It would basically mean that there's no way you can rationalize economically the use of any non-renewable natural resource because it's gone forever, and it is a loss of equal value to whoever comes after us. Economists typically don't think it makes sense to use a discount rate of zero because they're working in a system in which you've got to have, if you generate wealth now, you are creating the conditions for future wealth generation in the future, and abstaining from it now is therefore a loss down the road. Now, if you read like the Stern report and debates about how to put a price on climate change mitigation activities, it all comes down to the discount rate. If you use a low discount rate, then it makes all the sense in the world to stop using fossil fuels right now. If you use a high discount rate, it makes no sense at all to stop using fossil fuels right now. These decisions are extremely important. So this declaration on their part, speaking as economists, that the way to value natural capital is to use a zero discount rate is a very radical position to have staked out in 1992, because it basically means sustainability has got a very high threshold to meet. To call something sustainable means you have to be able to justify it at a zero discount rate, which is something that's extremely difficult to do. So they say we need to maintain total natural capital intact. Once carrying capacity has been reached, the simultaneous choice of a population level and an average standard of living level of per capita resource consumption becomes necessary. Harvesting rates must be less than regeneration, and waste emissions must be less than assimilative capacity. This is the 1992 Herman Daly, Robert Costanza definition of sustainability. And it's historically interesting because this is just before the Rio summit. This is a discourse about sustainable development that has become extremely important since this point in time, and it's interesting to see how this definition from this point in time compares to subsequent definitions since then. Oh my God, I'm out of time. I knew I wasn't going to get to the end. So, all right, we'll finish this up on Tuesday of next week, right? And on Thursday, make it happen, okay?